morning, everybody is here. We have to call the meeting to order first. So given that, the clerk has advised me that we have a quorum. Those appearing virtually that will be participating has been sound tested. So with that, I call the meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 128 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills, Social Development, and the Status of Persons with Disabilities. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format in accordance with the committee's routine motion that was adopted by the House of Commons. It covers members attending virtually and in person in the room. I would like to make a number of comments. Please to participate. Those in the room, raise your hand to get my attention. Wait until I recognize you. And those appearing virtually, use the raised hand icon and wait until I recognize you before participating. Today's meeting is taking place according to House of Commons rules in both official languages. You can participate in the official language of your choice by using interpretation services on the microphone in front of you, and I would advise witnesses as well as committee members to familiarize themselves with the translation services. If you're English, make sure you're on the English channel before you tell me you cannot hear translation, and that you're on the French one if you want to hear en français. On peering virtually, click on the globe icon on the bottom of your service and choose the official language of your choice. Also, those in the room, please turn off any devices you have that may have alarms on them that could go off to protect the translators, as well as please refrain from tapping on the microphone because it does give sounds that can be harmful to the translators. So with those, I want to first introduce the witness that are appearing today. Before I introduce the witness?
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay. Madame Zarilla, the meeting has been called to order. So you raised your hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I know everyone on this committee has heard stories from their constituents about how housing has become unaffordable, that their rents continue to rise, and that they worry about making ends meet. And I know everyone on this committee believes that Canadians deserve to know if their landlords are illegally price fixing. Now, there was an opportunity to address this weeks ago in this committee, but debate was adjourned by the Liberals and the Conservatives. So I'll move a motion to resume that debate. It is my hope that the committee will vote quickly, hopefully unanimously, so that we can go back to the study and the witnesses we have here today. With that, I move that the committee proceed to resume debate on the motion I moved on September 19th, which reads, given that while families are increasingly making hard choices about paying rent or keeping food on the table, corporate landlords have been contributing to rising rents in Canada by buying up previously affordable apartments and raising rents to increase profits for investors. One of Canada's largest corporate landlords, Dream Unlimited, has admitted to using AI software that the U.S. government has alleged allows landlords to illegally coordinate rent increases, and that the software is commonly used by as many as 13 companies in Canada with more than $5 billion in revenue. Today, the biggest real estate investment firms collectively own close to 20% of the purpose-built rental units in Canada, nearly 400,000 rental units, up from 0 in the 1990s. The Public Sector Pension Investment Board, also known as PSP Investments, has significant investments in multifamily housing in partnership with Starlight Investments. That pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills and Social Development and the Status of Persons with Disabilities undertake a study of the role of financialized landlords on rising costs in Canada's rental market, including how the use of algorithmic pricing tools is contributing to rent increases and how pervasive this practice is across the Canada rental market. That the committee invite President of Dream Unlimited, Michael J. Cooper, CEO of Starlight Investments, Daniel Dremer, CEO of Boardwalk Real Estate Investment Trust, Sam Colias, CEO of Main Street Equity, Bob Dillon, CEO of Canadian Apartment Properties Real Estate Investment Trust, Mark Kenny, President and CEO of PSP Investments, Deborah K. Orida, and other experts and stakeholders that the committee hold a minimum of 4 meetings and report its findings and recommendations to the House, and that the government table a comprehensive report. People must know whether corporate landlords in Canada are using the same artificial intelligence software to manipulate rent prices with the United States, which the United States is currently taking legal action on. There is no time to wait, Mr. Chair, and I've reshared with the clerk this motion in both official languages, and I look forward to a very quick vote. Thank you.
Okay, committee, could you just give me, I'll suspend for 2 moments while I just want to confirm the text of the motion currently being read to the one that was there. So I'll suspend for 2 moments. Motion. There is a minor difference, but it does not change the intent of the motion. But at this time, I'm calling a vote on does the committee wish to resume debate on the motion of Madame Zarrillo. Recorded vote.
Mr. Fragiscatos?
No.
Mr. Long?
No.
Mr. Collins? No. Mr. Coteau? No. Mr. Van Bynen? Mrs. Gray?
No.
Mrs. Falk?
No.
Ms. Vienne?
No.
Mr. Aitchison?
No.
Madame Chabot?
No.
Ms. Zarrillo?
Yes.
The motion has been defeated. We'll return to the agenda of the committee. So with this, I want to introduce from the Canadian Home Builders Association, Kevin Lee, Chief Executive Officer, appearing in the room. Nicolas Trudel, Assistant Director, Fédération des Travailleurs et Travailleuses du Québec, as well as Philippe Lapointe, Labor Relations Advisor, appearing by video conference. Mr. Lapointe is the only one we have confirmed at this time. From Habitat for Humanity Canada, Elena Lavoie, National Director, Housing Policy and Government Relations. We will begin with Mr. Lee. You have 5 minutes, and at 5 minutes, I will advise you to wrap up your comments. You have the floor, Mr. Lee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much for having me, and good morning. And I'm happy to bring my perspectives from the Canadian Home Builders Association on advancements in home building technologies. There's no question that we have a lot of challenge ahead of us as we try to address a variety of crises, from housing affordability to lack of housing supply to climate change mitigation and resiliency. Plus, we have a shrinking workforce when actually we need to be building many more homes, and technology innovation, and most importantly, creating an environment where those can be more readily adopted, do need to be part of the solution. I'm hoping that most of you here are familiar with our CHBA sector transition strategy. I know many of you are, and I've provided it to the clerk to provide it for you if you haven't. And this strategy is very much about how do we transform the home building sector to make better use of factory home technology to improve productivity while also addressing many of the other issues that I mentioned above. And it has a heavy, heavy emphasis on explaining what the barriers are and how we overcome those. Now, the short version of how do we move to much more factory-built construction in the sector is that we need to create much more certainty and de-risk the types of investments that are required to move from low overhead site-built approaches to high overhead factories. Whether you're talking about modular construction, panelized systems, or even 3D printing, the investment requirements are high, and the risks and the boom and bust nature of the housing market are even higher. So things like volume-based low-interest loans, tax credits, grant funding to support transition, modular construction, finance, insurance, and much more are needed. Also, we need a more steady pipeline of housing, which can be fixed by changes like we are seeing to the mortgage rule system to drive more buyers and hence more construction. And I would include that there is a remaining need to address the stress test. But one of the biggest barriers to getting more innovation, including factory-built systems, into play is not financing or technology. It's the barriers at the municipal level, from the differences from municipality to municipality in terms of zoning, bylaws, site plan rules, and the ridiculously wide range of completely different interpretations of the exact same building code, all of which prevent scaling technology, house plans, and investments. We need the provinces, with the support of the federal government, to step in and create harmonization at the municipal level. And we need a national code interpretation center that is binding so that code solutions that are proven in one town aren't rejected in the next town over. We also need a less expensive and more nimble Canadian Construction Materials Center that can help new technologies become acceptable code solutions more quickly. And we need to stop over-regulating. Regulation is the enemy of innovation, and it is what we are facing right now. There are way too many requirements going into building codes and standards these days, and the pace of change is more than the industry can handle, more than building officials can handle, and it is more than the code development system can handle. Regulation is getting rushed through and ends up creating unintended consequences like overheating in homes. It's driving up prices and slowing productivity. And instead of spending time innovating, industry is spending time in hundreds and hundreds of codes and standards meetings trying to bring reality to a system that, if left to its devices, will create gold-plated houses that no one can afford and may cause massive problems for its occupants. Meanwhile, voluntary standards and the innovation and cost-effective approaches to meeting new challenges are not nearly enough the focus for government and industry that they should be, yet this is where smart innovation and solutions occur. So are there new technologies emerging? Yes, and lots of them. But what we need to create is an environment where more adoption can happen faster. And that doesn't come from regulation. We need a huge emphasis on affordability. We need affordability as a core objective of the National Building Code and all the standards it calls up. We need a full press on government research in collaboration with industry to drive down the cost of construction through innovation, because lower cost innovations are always fast to be adopted by the industry. We're also a very resilient industry because we are an industry of small and micro businesses, but this market in this situation, trial and error can be very expensive and potentially devastating to deal with in business. So we need technology adoption programming that helps our industry members try new technologies with full de-risking and lessons learned feedback loops to support industry and manufacturers continue to advance. There are some super promising technologies like AI for accelerating municipal planning and approval processes, and we are keenly watching AI-driven robotics that could make investing in modular and panelized factory a fraction of what the cost is today. So I'm happy to talk to you about these emerging technologies and many more, but the one thing I'll end with as we look at emerging technologies is this. We need to acknowledge the actual realities of the industry, why it is structured the way it is, the importance of affordability as a key driver in innovation, and create a better policy environment for industry to be able to adopt emerging technologies. With that environment, we can accelerate change at a much faster pace to face the myriad of challenges ahead. I look forward to talking about all of
Thank
this
you,
with
Mr. Lee. Mr. Lapointe for 5 minutes. Mr. Lapointe?
Oui. Yes, good morning. Philippe Lapointe, and I'm here with my colleague, Mr. Trudel, and we're from EFTQ Construction, an association that represents 44% of builders in the province of Quebec. And here's what I wanted to discuss with you today. The three challenges that the construction industry faces as we introduce new technologies and new ways of doing things. The first is adapting skills. Secondly, adapting health and safety. And third, the need for a cultural change. The construction industry is slow to innovate. Home building is more of a craft than an industry. And oftentimes, there's not enough means, and that means that it's difficult to obtain new technologies. And as I said, home building is more of a craft than an industry. Each building is unique and built one piece or brick at a time. And even if the plans are identical, the manufacturing conditions will invariably be different because of labour mobility, the weather, the particularities of each site. And in these conditions, the expertise of the workforce is crucial to the success of construction. Now, that said, many new technologies are being introduced to improve productivity. As the largest representative association of workers in Quebec, we need to warn you that the introduction of innovative materials, for it to be successful, we require the input of workers. And during our presentation, we'll be given examples from our members' own expertise in the field. Now, adapting skills. Workers have to interpret plans. They make adjustments as they go along based on previous steps that they've taken. And they need to know how to work with new materials and methods before they even set foot on the work site, because there's no time to learn on the hop. Now, it's workers who implement and ensure the innovative projects and initiatives see the light of day. There's a high likelihood that nice initiatives on paper will fail to reach their target if those who have to implement them are not trained in the proper innovative methods. Vocational training is crucial if workers are to build our future infrastructure to the requisite standards. For example, we have examples of new materials such as insulating blankets, which, if incorrectly installed, need to be fixed. They're extremely energy efficient, but they may interfere, if improperly installed, with subsequent steps. And they may become less and less watertight or waterproof and end up being ineffective. Now, in Quebec, FTQ Construction is calling for a compulsory vocational diploma for all journey persons, and that diploma can be obtained in one fell swoop before entering the job market or as they go along as part of a work-study program during an apprenticeship in a trade or an occupation as they go about obtaining their journey person qualification. Now, unfortunately, with the Quebec government, there's been no progress in that regard. Next, adapting health and safety. Construction is the deadliest industry in Quebec. We lost over 68 workers in 2023 due to accidents and occupational illnesses, and over 9,500 non-fatal occupational injuries. And the introduction of new technologies must occur with the input of workers. And let's remember the introduction of asbestos. which was perceived as a miracle product, but in fact it's now the biggest source of casualties in the industry over 15 or 20 years after exposure. People can't even breathe when exposed to it. So new quote-unquote miracle products and innovations must not be deadly, obviously. Another example is workers working side by side with automatic machines. And this will require a lot of adaptation too. How are we going to introduce them? These dangers and hazards need to be eliminated. And manufacturers offer heavy machinery now with the mechanical shovels and dump trucks remotely or even autonomously. And these vehicles should not be used where there is a lot of workers nearby on site. There are unpredictable and complex work sites and in proximity to the general public. And operators, for example, you can't be operating a machine remotely from Toronto because it makes it difficult to intervene in case of a hazard. Lastly, the new worksite management and planning technologies must not become tools to surveil workers. Now, in recent years, we've seen management tools that do not track the work, but rather the workers themselves, either by geolocation or by video surveillance cameras. And that's in real time. And the precautions must be taken to ensure that workers' rights and freedoms aren't flouted in the name of productivity. Now, I visited, I'm sorry to cut you off, sir. I'm wrapping up, if I may. The construction industry is seasonal, subject to cyclical fluctuations, and generally operates on an intermittent basis. Work is carried out on a project-by-project basis, and to make a decent living, workers have to obtain contracts over the course of the year and compete with each other for available positions. I'm terribly sorry, Mr. Lapointe.
Madame Lavoie, 5 minutes, and I will advise it is 5 minutes.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here with you today and to contribute to this study. It may seem a little bit unusual that we are here, but hopefully that will become clearer as we go along. My name is Alana Lavoie. I am the National Director of Housing Policy and Government Relations for Habitat for Humanity Canada. We are Canada's only national affordable homeownership organization. Nous sommes constitués de 45 habitats.
In fact, there are 44 stakeholders that serve Canadians from coast to coast, and they're part of a global operation in over 70 countries. And by working with donors, governments and communities that offer their time, money and material, we build houses and we sell them at their true market value to eligible and low-income families.
Habitat for Humanity homes do not pay a down payment, and their mortgage never exceeds roughly 30% of their income. To be eligible for a Habitat home, families must need improved housing. They must be able to carry the costs of owning a home and paying a geared-to-income mortgage, and be willing to commit 500 volunteer hours to Habitat. Many of our future Habitat homeowners have in fact traditionally helped to build their own homes. Habitat provides financial literacy courses and homeowner education and home maintenance seminars. It really is a true partnership and a very unique pathway to homeownership at a time when it is very difficult to achieve homeownership. In 2023, almost half of the families who partnered with Habitat were led by single mothers. 1 in 5 families had one member living with a physical or mental disability. 1 in 10 families had at least one member who identifies as Indigenous. And 1 in 10 families were newcomers to Canada. Families have a chance to build equity. Parents can go back to school. They retrain and get better jobs. Their kids have a safe and secure place to study and grow. The mental health of the family improves, the physical health of the family improves, and we see them invest more in their communities. However, doing what we do is not easy. It's a complex assembly of inputs, the same as those for any home builder. Many of the challenges faced that was raised by my colleague Mr. Lee in the broader home building sector are the same ones that we face. However, we face them with some budget realities that come together a little more gradually than you may see in other sectors and require a lot of creativity to get to where we can provide a family with a home. But that said, our leaders are incredibly creative. They are innovative and they are solutions-oriented. And for us, that has meant digging into how emerging home building technologies can reduce the costs to build, which allows us to put more families in homes. And help smooth out the challenges of the home building process in an extremely high cost and variable home building environment. This is why across our federation at Habitat for Humanity, we're embracing newer approaches, from 3D printing in Windsor and Peterborough, modular construction in PEI and New Brunswick, and even starting to explore the potential of mass timber. We're building to higher standards that create more sustainable homes with reduced costs for our families over the long term, including net zero and passive houses. We stay on top of evolving and innovative building materials through partnerships with building material suppliers. We're very fortunate to have a Build, Gift, in Kind program where we work directly with companies who are willing to work with us to try some new windows or new plumbing fixtures or technologies. But embracing these new ways of building, it doesn't come without challenges. And we certainly are looking to governments to help us have a more systemic approach to providing opportunities for habitats and other nonprofits who build housing to be on the cutting edge of using some of these technologies. The capital investments that are required for modular builds and 3D prints and the things we haven't yet discovered tend to require different capital flows than traditional stick builds. Many governments and financial institutions are offering funding and financing options for home buildings that are structured around traditional construction milestones that can particularly create challenges for nonprofits and charities who are trying to enter into using these technologies. We have can have less flexible financing situation in some cases than other kinds of builders. The disbursements of funding and loan payments, they follow very specific milestones, things like when your build permits are secured and when your drywall is completed, your occupancy permits are secured. It's helpful if you have drywall, you might not in a 3D print, who knows. And in most cases, the disbursements can generally line up with when we need to pay and when we have the money going out. However, a lot of these emerging technologies, and most of our experience to date has been with modular, both in Canada and around the world, there's a more significant outlay of cash that's required up front. And
Ms. Lavoie,
Thank you.
we'll now begin the first round for 6 minutes with Mr. Aitchison. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to start with Mr. Lee. I want to thank all the witnesses for being here, but I'd like to start with you, Mr. Lee. And you spoke a bit in your presentation about factory-built homes and modular construction. That itself is not new technology. Probably the most success we've ever had in this country in terms of getting homes built and built fast is right after the Second World War, and factory-built homes was a big part of that. Aside from the technology that's used in these factories today versus back then, what is the biggest difference between then and now when it comes to getting homes built faster and cheaper?
Specifically with respect to modular?
Yeah.
Well, I think what you see with the modular construction, there's more machinery that is used. There's not a lot of robotics yet. There's some that's emerging, but you're able to do things in a systematized, industrialized way, and so it makes things a lot faster. And you're also able to work on the structure itself while the site is being prepared. So you could be excavating and pouring a foundation at the exact same time as you're, literally building the roof.
Just, maybe I'm not being very clear. Aside from the technology that's utilized today in the factory versus back after the Second World War, and the technique is the same, right? I mean, getting the sites ready and all that kind of stuff. What's the biggest difference today versus back then in terms of trying to get homes built faster and delivered?
Oh, I see. Municipal interference and the process of getting everything done. Honestly, that is it is so hard to get through all of the red tape, frankly, that needs to occur, because we can build the houses really fast. We can, using my last example, we can build that house faster in the factory than we can get a building permit in most cities. And so the biggest difference is what's going on at the municipal level for a variety of reasons, but it's definitely time to get that cleaned up.
So it's safe to say that in a factory you could build the homes a lot faster than you could have the sites ready to go to put the homes on because of municipal delays in the approval process. Obviously, there's probably a difference in terms of the cost at the municipal level today versus back then.
Yeah, I mean, development charges are up 700% over the past 25 years and continue to climb. It's an unbelievable number, yeah.
So if you could speak to, just briefly, you also mentioned about building code issues. Now, when a home is built in a factory, it's CSA standards, but then, of course, it gets to the site, and sometimes the local building officials gets involved. And could you speak a bit to that, that there's some, obviously, there's a little lack of understanding about who's the authority here?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a great CSA 277 standard for factory-built housing that is the equivalent of building code, and there's all kinds of inspections that occur within the plant. Unfortunately, most municipalities aren't familiar with all of that, so there ends up being a lot of duplication and a lack of acceptance of things that have already been tested and inspected. So there's a huge opportunity to very much streamline the process by using the CSA standard properly, eliminating a lot that needs to be done municipally, and actually alleviating the burden, frankly, on municipal officials too. So there's a lot of benefit to the municipalities to move this along.
Okay, thanks very much. I'll move over to Ms. Lavoie, if I could now. In relation to Mr. Lee's comments about municipal charges and fees and expenses and the process, the often long, painful, expensive process to get a home approved, is it safe to assume that Habitat for Humanity, an amazing charitable organization, faces the same challenges from municipal governments?
Absolutely, absolutely. We're fortunate in some municipalities where we've managed to develop really strong relationships, and depending on the jurisdiction, we do have some of the fees waived, development charges, for example, but we are still seeing permit delays that are adding costs that are harder for us to absorb, quite frankly, and are not reflected in the funding arrangements that we have with any governments. So it's definitely a very real challenge for us as well. And again, we also partner often with the home building sector, and we just feel the exact same things that they do.
What's the average household income required to qualify today for a Habitat home in the GTA, for example?
GTA is an interesting case. It tends to be a little bit higher. We're now looking at what would be considered workforce numbers in terms of income levels. So we can see as high as 120,000. We would see similar in Vancouver. Our lowest income level that we serve across Canada is 22,000 approximately. A lot of this is determined by province and by the local municipality in terms of what their affordability is and the local conditions.
How much has that number changed in the last, say, 8-10 years in the GTA in Vancouver, for example, the income required?
I don't have the exact percentage, but we are certainly seeing an upward pressure. The families that we are serving are increasingly families that we would have previously characterized as solid working class families, who with a little bit of time and a lot of savings and hard work would have been able to achieve home ownership. And we're certainly seeing even more professionals sort of falling into that category. And if not served by us, certainly would need to be served by someone.
Okay, thanks very much.
Mr. Long, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon to my colleagues, and thank you to the witnesses for coming in to testify. Very important topic. Mr. Lee, my first questions will be to you, and we met before, obviously, and you've been before the committee several times. But actually, before I start with my first question to you, I just want to make a couple comments that, I am proud to be part of a government that has stepped up and, recognized the challenge that we face really from coast to coast to coast with respect to housing, building housing, and showing innovation and helping builders innovate. Whether it's through different programs like the Apartment Construction Loan Program, Home Building Technology and Innovation Fund, obviously the Rapid Housing Program, the COVI program, et cetera, et cetera. We've stepped up, and we recognize, too, that, most of this is provincial jurisdiction, but as a federal government, we have a key role to play. You were in St. John not too long ago. I think about people like Brad McLaughlin, Riel Guimond, that are wonderful local home builders. I will say this. I think the residential construction industry sometimes is seen as slow to change and kind of trapped in tradition. Now, in St. John, if you walked the trade show there, you saw some wonderful builders showing, wonderful innovation. So, Mr. Lee, just from the start, can you just talk about, in your opinion, the biggest barriers to innovation in home building?
I think the biggest barriers to innovation are just the risk of taking on new technology for small businesses. Which is why I was mentioning in my remarks, we really need to create there's a great opportunity to create programming to help de-risk trying new things. It's not like you build a test car and whip it around the track somewhere. Like, we can't build test houses that cost, hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars, and see if they work, and then what do you do with them afterwards? And there have been government demonstration programs in the past, but even then, like, when you demonstrate that technology and you have a full-blown, today it'd be like $1 million house, what do you do with it afterwards if those things don't work? And so there is a huge opportunity to create programming. There's actually a small program at Natural Resources Canada called LEAP, which is very much around helping building industry. The L in LEAP is for local. It's working with local industry, help adopt and try new technologies, test them out, and then feed back to the manufacturers to help them improve. Say, here were our problems installing, this is what worked, this is what didn't work. But it's that risk, and people say home builders that they are risk averse. Home builders have the biggest risk appetites of almost any business going. It is such a risky business. Your job is actually to mitigate risk constantly, and so bringing in new technologies is a new risk. So you need some help in making sure that they work well and you can trial them.
Thanks for that. Just as a follow-up to that, I mean, some construction innovation would be AI, machine learning, resource workforce management software, 3D printing. Are there other innovations that you see as critical? And, which areas of innovation matter the most to you?
Well, I think what we're seeing is a ton of pressure on the housing system and on the code system to respond to all kinds of things like climate change. But what we're missing in all of those is a real focus on affordability and really driving down the cost. So, because right now, we've labeled over 2,200 net zero and net zero ready homes across the country. We know how to build them, and we're working really hard to optimize them. What I can't say is that level of energy performance is ready for the building code, because it's still very expensive. So what we really need to focus on is how do we drive down the cost of all of these things? How do we look at everything that's going into code at once, cost it all, and say, what are our priorities, and where do we drive prices down so that we can address all of these challenges at the same time, because they're all important.
Just one final thing for you, Mr. Lee. You mentioned about municipal barriers and how they vary, and I mean, obviously we see that in New Brunswick, and so I'll stay out of the provincial politics side. So, with respect to New Brunswick, how do we fix it? How do we fix that issue between differences in municipalities? What do you recommend?
I think the federal government needs to set the stage, needs to collaborate with the provincial governments, because it is provincial jurisdiction. But then, at that provincial level, we really need to restrict the changes and all the differences from municipality to municipality. And that is fully within the rights of the provinces to work with the municipality to say, look, we don't need all these different zoning issues. We don't need all these different bylaw changes. They don't need to be different from literally across the street to the other. And when we interpret code, it's the same provincial building code. We should have the same interpretations. What works in one city should work in the next, and that's something that the federal government and provinces can collaborate on.
Thank you, and welcome. Ms. Lavoie, thank you for all you do for Habitat. I was at the Restore opening in St. John in January. I mean, it's a wonderful thing that you do for our community. So my question is this. Habitat for Humanity has built an excellent and unique reputation for themselves within the housing landscape and with us in government who see the important work you do benefiting people in our communities, like obviously St. John Rothsay. We've had the pleasure of establishing a financial partnership with Habitat for Humanity through CMHC to build hundreds of affordable homes and units and further supporting some of the local chapters through our channels like Co-op Housing. Can you just share with the committee how the unique housing model for Habitat for Humanity offers lens to innovation?
Madame Lavoie, you will have to answer that at another. I'm keeping the times tight. You're 6 minutes over. Madame Chabot pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur.
6 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson, and thanks to all of our witnesses. Well, evidently at the Humour Committee, the studies on housing have been piling up, and the particular focus under the motion on the table is what the issues are when it comes to technological advancements and so on and so forth. And I'd like to commend all stakeholders on their input, but I'd particularly like to thank FTQ Construction. Now, behind this whole issue of housing, whether it be homes or affordable housing, there are workers. And without them, there'd be no construction in the first place. So it's important to get their input. And my question will be for Mr. Lapointe. Now, you already discussed challenges. Now, fortunately, in Quebec, there's occupational health and safety issues that have jurisdictional stakes, and you, of course, referred to those challenges. And I think that you're about to talk about cultural change. So here's my question, and perhaps you can finish the tail end of your remarks. That would be my question. Well, thank you for that opportunity, Ms. Chabot. Well, basically, workers work in a precarious community, and so do contractors. There's a huge amount of pressure with calls for tenders and how to get access to work sites. Now, as we said previously, and Mr. Lee also referred to us, when it comes to adaptation challenges and risk capital, venture risk, these workers are not going to take the leap and use innovative products if there's not a proper call for tenders. And the federal government has a huge role to play here. As a tenderer, the federal government can in fact instigate this kind of innovation and enable contractors and builders to come forward without fear. Now, I've worked on a number of committees, both on the employer side and primarily, but in order to implement new technologies, and let me give you an example of the circular economy. We're trying to set up a circular economy using materials from residue or waste from building, and if there are no checks and balances, if there is no due diligence, the necessary structural changes to reuse and repurpose this material and other work sites, that will never occur, because when there's a tender process, builders are going to try and bid low in order to secure the contract. So maybe it'll take a little bit longer to build a house as it needs to be built, but that's how they'll be more competitive. This needs to be done upstream, and the government needs to intervene in this regard. We need upstream planning as far as how buildings are tendered in the first place. Question. Well, thank you for that. In your opening remarks, you referred to the fact that workers are part and parcel of the solution itself. And their input needs to be there right from the beginning. Now, concretely speaking, what does that look like? We're in favour of social dialogue, but how do we concretely improve things when it comes to the plight of workers on work sites, please, on building sites? Response. When building plans are developed to build a house, and I think that my colleague Nicolas might like to chime in on this issue. Nicolas, would you like to take a stab at that question? Yes, with pleasure. Well, when it comes to workers in the building sector, we need more training so that they can adapt to the new cutting-edge technologies that are on the horizon. The folks already have the skills, but they need to develop new strategies in order to put them to good use. We need to provide a safe and stable workplace for our workers so we have a solid pool of workers so that we can carry out the plans that are on the horizon. So they're the two issues that I would focus on, and I'd hand the floor back to Philippe if you'd like to add anything to that. Yes, well, sometimes workers themselves understand how to go about the tasks than those who've developed the plans. And we've noticed that on a number of occasions. Now, those who do demolition, for example, sometimes they're paid on a weight basis, how much they can demolish, and that's how much they're paid. And they were able to recover over 85% of the material, and there was very little waste. Now, how did that come about? We gave them time to do what they needed to do. We deferred to them, and an employer might have just come along with their and rode roughshod over them and said, this is how to go about it, which isn't appropriate. Yes, if you'd like to add something. Well, workers need to be involved in this change process. That's crucial. They want to participate in this process. They have to be involved. They're the ones who are going to be doing the job after all.
Chabot, votre temps est...
Thank you, Ms. Chabot. Your time is over.
Madame Zarillo for 6 minutes.
Chair, and I would also like to direct my questions to Witness Lapointe and Trudel. I really appreciated the introduction of the deadly health impacts of asbestos on workers when thorough investigation and regulation was not in place. And in 2024, we can definitely do better than that. So I think about in my community of Coquitlam, at the end of last year, there was a catastrophic shoring fail on site of one of the towers that was being built. And even the next day, there was still rock slinging trucks on site, even though they were not supposed to have any workers in the excavation site. So my question to Mr. Lapointe, Witness Lapointe, is just around what federal policies can be in place to ensure that workers are safe now and as new technologies come in the future.
Well, I had the luck to be at COP26 and COP27 with the Canadian delegation and to see different materials proposed for housing. And what the question we asked was, how was it tested? And all the time, this is something that is really important, is how do we get from this proposition of a new material to how do we get this on the work site? And for asbestos, it just got in really quickly. You know, Quebec is the only province that we even used it in concrete, and we used it everywhere. And I think across all public services, we have this material that is just lying there for the public to be infected and the workers to be affected by it too. So what we need to do is really have a thorough testing before. And we have all the resources for this, but sometimes we just have the get-go to get the materials on the work site just too fast.
Thank you. And you mentioned that you were at COP, which is great. In my riding, Port Moody, they just recently, in the last week, forged ahead on some new efficiency and emissions requirements for any new builds. And I wonder if you could share perhaps how you would see federal policy being able to influence these environmental and emissions requirements for new builds and retrofits.
Well, across like the hierarchy of who give orders in the construction sector, obviously it's provincial level is the first one. After that, you've got mostly the federal, which is a large work giver, and after that you get to the municipal level. So the federal, just as being an employer, like a client of construction, is could really be one of the big changers. I'll switch to French, it'll be easier. Alors, ce que ça fait, c'est qu'en étant
So the upshot of this is that when you provide this kind of work, the federal government can establish benchmarks as to what's required when it comes to public infrastructure, roads, ports. All federal public infrastructure becomes an opportunity to test and to trial new technologies. And of course, you have to train the labour force to implement that technology. And once that's done on a federal work site, they can do it on other work sites. So that could be a role model. That will ensure that there are environmental standards that are met. There's also the federal program for new materials that is already up and running. And of course, there can be requirements under the building code, which is supposed to be in and of itself energy efficient. But first and foremost, how do you get the labour force that can do the job? A lot of researchers that have been involved with FTQ construction have said, despite the fact that there are solid proposals, contractors are not able to read the plans or execute the work because they don't have the requisite training. What does that mean? There's a demand, but the demand was never met because they didn't have the right training in the first place. Thank you.
And I do want to revisit workers because workers are, I'm thinking about BC right now, many workers are of retirement age that are working in construction. It's an aging workforce just like any other, but also too in BC, the opioid crisis is over-indexing, over-impacting people in trades, deaths by drug poisoning, over-indexing. And some of this is just based on the actual pressure that is on these workers to build. So I wonder if you wouldn't mind sharing how the federal government can help to save lives in the construction industry for workers.
Une des choses qu'on disait tout à l'heure, c'est par rapport.
One thing that we referred to earlier, well, there's two problems. It's a two-pronged issue. First, precarity. And that's due to the fact that there's no job security. So we need stability when it comes to contracts being awarded. But unfortunately, the various levels of government like to make beautiful announcements, wonderful announcements, as opposed to planning the workload over a 12-month period. So sometimes there's a peak, and then unfortunately, when that peak is over, people become jobless. And when they don't have enough work, well, that's when they get injured because they try to prove that they're extremely productive. And so governments that provide all this work should ensure that there's some kind of regularity when it comes to the work so that builders have food on their tables for the whole year. And the next issue is employment insurance that needs to be fixed.
Falk for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for giving their time to our committee today. We know that to achieve housing affordability that we need to build and we need more housing supply in Canada. That's something that this committee and the House has definitely acknowledged. Mr. Lee, I'd like to start with you, if possible. Just regarding your earlier comments regarding small businesses not adapting new technology due to the risk of it, I'm just wondering how the current economic climate is impacting the willingness of businesses to take on the risk related to new innovations and technologies.
Well, certainly higher interest rates are making it harder to invest, and that's been a big challenge. And it's actually just construction financing has got more difficult. I think in terms of innovation and willingness to adopt, we have a lot of leading edge builders from coast to coast that are always looking to try new things, always looking to address energy efficiency, climate change, et cetera. When the market is tough, you tend to concentrate on other things, though, right? It's a little bit more difficult to be looking at those innovations and that sort of thing when you're really having to deal with cost all the time. So the tougher the market, the harder it is to adopt new innovation.
Would you say that there was maybe a time in recent history where builders were more inclined to invest in new technologies as opposed to maybe today?
Yeah, I would say again, when things are going well, when the market is a little stronger, it's a little easier. Also, as I mentioned in my remarks, there's so much code change going on right now that there's not a lot of chance right now to try and innovate and find your own solutions to, you know, the challenges that you see. You're really just dealing with all of the code changes that are happening really fast, and you're concerned about that. And most of those code changes are also driving up prices, unfortunately. So again, it becomes more difficult to innovate and look at other technologies. So, you know, if we can be a little bit wiser about what we do on the regulatory side and give the industry a chance to innovate according to its priorities, I think we'll be much better off. Same too with pushing on affordability. If we were pushing affordability through the code, we would see more innovation because people would be not saying, well, we'll just do this to this degree and it doesn't matter how much it costs. No, you can't do it unless it's cost effective. That's a totally different game, and that's where you really start to see the innovation come.
Mm-hmm. And I know there's been a lot of conversation about municipal fees, for example, and even just with the code. How much of those excess fees are getting passed on to the homeowner?
100% and more. I mean, all of those, that is an input cost into the home. And so it has to be passed on. And the reason I say and more is because those are financed. So if you're paying hundreds of thousands of dollars on development fees early on in the process, you're financing that over years. So the interest charges on that, you have to pass on to the client. Otherwise, you're going to go out of business. So yeah, all the taxes, all the fees, all the delays, all unfortunately end up in the price of a home. It has to.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Mr. Chair, I'm just going to pass my remaining time over to MP Aitchison.
1 minute and 20 seconds.
Thank you. I just following up on what you just said, this is not what I want to ask, but it's important to point out that those fees and charges at the local level are financed by the developer, but then they go on the cost of the mortgage for the homeowner and they get financed again. So it's an important point to make. I wanted to speak specifically, though, to financial system and policy recommendations the Canadian Home Builders made in their report on sector transition strategy. You mentioned a number of items. One of the things that wasn't mentioned in there, though, I mean, we basically need to attract, roughly $3 trillion of investment in the housing space over the next few years to build the homes we need. Do you think that the government's most recent changes to the capital gains tax is helpful to attract that investment or not?
I think that's more on the personal income tax side. It can definitely present challenges because the more taxation there are on individuals, the harder it is to be able to afford and invest, be it in your own home, be it in purchasing another unit that can become an important part of the rental supply. So it can definitely be a challenge.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Aitchison, we'll now conclude with Mr. Fragas-Catos for 5 minutes.
Chair, thank you very much, and to both of you here today, and to Mr. Lapointe, thank you very much for taking part in today's meeting. An important topic, to be sure. Mr. Lee, I want to ask you a question, which is maybe indirect to the topic at hand, but I think still relevant because the amortization changes announced recently, going to 30 years for new builds and for first-time buyers. You could have homes built using innovative technologies that would apply to buyers in both categories. What do you think of that particular change?
Yeah, obviously the change to amortization rules is something we've been calling for a long time because we need to get more supply. And if we can enable more people to enter the market and create a better market, it goes to the previous question. If you are having a tough time just selling any house, you're not concerned about innovation. And if I could add, just today more announcements were made around the insured mortgage space to allow refinancing to then create secondary suites. And that speaks directly to what we're talking about today also to enable secondary suites, laneway suites, et cetera. We have a lot of opportunity to increase density gently through laneway housing and that sort of thing, and financing has been a big barrier to that. So enabling Canadians to find ways to finance a secondary suite, be it for their own family or rentals to others, is a huge opportunity.
Yeah, No, great to get your perspective, considering the fact that you represent so many home builders. The adding supply is so critical in the discussion about the housing challenges and the crisis that we face. Back to the direct topic, though, I want to ask you, are you aware of any examples internationally where countries have really focused in on innovative technologies in housing? I know Japan is frequently mentioned. I think some of the Scandinavian countries are mentioned. Can you add anything on that, Mr. Lee?
Yeah, I'm very involved with the International Housing Association and past chair there. And I think when we look at other countries, you know, some of the world leaders have done it because of crises of their own. Japan is definitely a world leader in terms of automation and factory-built housing. Reason? They have an incredibly aging population and lost half of their carpenters over the last decade. So they really moved to more automation. So they're very much leaders in a country we can look to. But again, the rationale was what we're facing, but much more extreme. Germany is another world leader in terms of robotics and automation and technology, and a little bit in Scandinavia. So, but largely everybody's looking at the same challenges around the world. So I wouldn't say we're really far behind the 8 ball. We're just we're all facing similar challenges.
Yeah, I asked that as a way of understanding the wider global context and what we can learn from the experiences of other countries. Ms. Lavoie, if I can ask you about even the turn that Habitat has made towards 3D printing. You and I were talking before the meeting about some of the work that that Habitat has taken up. Can you go into that? How did that all come about? Because I think when people think about organizations like Habitat for Humanity, they have great respect for organizations that focus on compassion, that focus on helping provide a roof over the head of people in need, members of our communities, and certainly in London, where I'm from, Habitat has done incredible work in that regard. But you're looking at things now like 3D printing. That's really impressive. How did that all come into being?
Well, I can say I believe there is a witness later that will be speaking specifically about a project in Leamington, Ontario, that was done with Habitat. But basically, it was a question of flexible financing through CMHC's Innovation Fund, which functions differently than our core funding agreement. It was about collaboration with an academic institution and a technology company that came together, and the opportunity to do something a little bit differently in terms of providing a shelter space for a third party. So there was time enough and money enough and financing enough to allow for that experimentation. And there was some false starts, and there was some restarts, and there was some learning. And fortunately, the learning is actually going to continue as a result of the partnership, which again, you'll hear more about later. So from our perspective, any of these kind of projects, whether it's 3D printing, modular, incorporating more panelized mass timber, for us, it's going to be about finding the right partners and having the financial opportunity and support to even partner with an organization who's applying these technologies.
Sorry, just with the remaining 10 seconds, I'm going to assume that because of these technologies, Habitat looks at that as an opportunity to get homes onto the market much faster and provide those in need with real options when it comes to a home. Absolutely. That's the main advantage.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Fragascatos. With that, we are suspending. Ms. Cirillo?
Mr. Chair, just before you suspend, witness Lapointe was just about to talk about employment insurance needing to be fixed, and I'd like to ask that the witness be allowed to send in a written statement about what needs to be fixed for employment insurance for construction workers.
Sure.
Thank you.
We'll, thank you, Madame Cirillo. We will communicate that to the witness, clerk. With that, we'll suspend for a few moments while we transition to the next panel. I want to thank all the panelists for appearing in person, and virtually on this very interesting subject on housing. We'll suspend for 4 minutes. Suspend. Back to order. We transition to the second hour. We have two witnesses to welcome who have been sound tested and we're okay to go. So I would like to introduce Patrick Chouinard, Corporate Citizenship by video conference. And for Habitat for Humanity, Windsor, Essex, Fiona Coughlin, Chief Executive Officer. We'll begin with Mr. Chouinard for 5 minutes, please.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity to appear today. My name is Patrick Chouinard. I'm the founder of Element 5. We are a large, highly automated mass timber manufacturer in St. Thomas, Ontario. The IKEA effect has made its way to the construction industry. We manufacture buildings in our factory and ship them to construction sites where they are assembled rather than being constructed in the traditional sense, quickly, efficiently, and affordably. Despite Europe being 30 years ahead of us, Canada is incredibly well positioned to become the center of the mass timber industry globally. 4 years ago, we turned our attention to addressing affordable housing. We thought, since we can manufacture buildings quickly, affordably, and in volume, maybe we have at least part of the solution to Ontario's affordable housing crisis. In 4 years, we have delivered 7 buildings ranging from 18 to 43 units and 2 to 8 stories, providing supportive housing, temporary shelters, and transition housing for single women, women with children, single men, and Indigenous women at risk of homelessness in Kitchener, York Region, Hamilton, Toronto, Sudbury, and Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. The affordable housing crisis is fundamentally a supply problem. Demand exceeds supply. Clearly, there are only 2 solutions to the problem, in my view. Curb demand by stifling growth reducing immigration and limiting the number of foreign students, or instead enabling growth by focusing on the supply side of the problem, investing in manufacturing, and building housing quickly. I agree with the housing motion. It states, invest in home building technology, explore emerging materials, construction methods, energy efficient systems, and digital innovations. The government has played a pivotal role in our success as a manufacturer and our ability to supply housing affordably, provincially under the PC government and federally under the Liberal government. We have received significant grants from the Ontario provincial government to help fund our factory, create jobs, and boost Canadian exports. However, 80% of the affordable housing projects we have delivered so far have been partly funded by the federal government's Rapid Housing Initiative. We are living proof of the value of private and public partnerships. By July 2025, we will employ over 170 people and be North America's largest mass timber manufacturer. Most of our projects have been supportive housing, mainly because that's where we see the greatest need. None of those projects would have gone ahead without Rapid Housing Initiative funding. The same technology we're applying to supportive housing, we're also applying to other forms of housing, market rate housing, retirement homes, student residences, Indigenous housing, hotels, and beyond. There are many things the government can be doing to foster this form of construction. Too many to suggest in the 5 minutes allotted. Let me leave you with these few suggestions. 1, invest in the supply side of the housing problem. Invest in manufacturing, Canadian innovation, Canadian forestry, Canadian labor, and Canadian industry leadership. Municipal governments must abandon traditional procurement systems. In other words, the design, bid, build, tender process, and adopt a design build approach which fosters innovation. Thirdly, there's talk of the Rapid Housing Initiative being expensive. We attribute most of our success in affordable housing to the federal government's Rapid Housing Initiative. Mass timber is important to Canada in many ways. Leverage it to achieve our national housing objectives. We're using it to build Indigenous infrastructure and housing. Several primary sawmills from which we source our raw materials are partly Indigenous owned. Because of the thermal mass properties of mass timber, buildings perform better. We've just finished a 6-story version for city housing, Hamilton, designed to Passive House standard. Use mass timber to hit our climate goals. When building with mass timber, we're systematically leveraging our forest natural ability to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and store carbon ultimately in the form of these beautiful buildings. Use mass timber to improve environment and occupant health. And lastly, invest in it to create jobs, build our forestry sector, boost Canadian exports, and become global leaders in this emerging industry. Thank you.
Ms. Coughlin for 5 minutes. Ms. Coughlin, you're on mute.
My name is Fiona Coughlin, and I am the CEO of Habitat for Humanity in Windsor, Essex. So we are an affiliate of Habitat for Humanity Canada, who you heard from previously. And we're basically the boots on the ground that get the houses built. I've also built personally in Kenya, and I'll be building in Nepal later this year. And while I was in Kenya, we were learning about compressed soil blocks that were rammed earth that were an innovative way to build houses using limited resources that were in Kenya. And I think that is core to what transformed my view on 3D printing. We took on a project, as I'm sure you heard, that was initiated through collaboration with Habitat Canada, with our local University of Windsor, which has the largest structural engineering lab in the country. and with 3D printers that were all seeking funding from CMHC, and CMHC said, we need Habitat on this to make sure that the end result are affordable homes for people to live in. So we were successful in creating Canada's first 3D printed homes that were permitted for residential use. There's lots of experimental builds that happen from time to time. And at the end result, if you're not working with your city officials and your planners and your builders, the end result is a structure that does not achieve occupancy. We are the first that achieved occupancy. It was also the first multi-unit 3D printed structure in North America. It was the first in North America that was built with concrete rather than a cementatious mortar. So the concrete's slightly more environmentally friendly and structurally better. And at the time of completion in 2022, it was the largest 3D printed building in North America. So we count this as a huge success. I also noted that this committee is very interested in accessibility, and one of the side benefits of taking on an innovative project was local partners came out of the woodwork. And we locally have a virtual reality cave that actually made a virtual reality model of the house before we even got it out of the ground, where we could test a wheelchair through this virtual reality model, and it buzzed at you whenever you hit the walls. At the end result of this project, we had 4 units in a self-contained home. The homes are fully accessible, net zero ready, and comply with all local planning and building regulations for residential use. We found on the same site, our partners built modular construction. We found that our 3D printed structures saved $5 a square foot, but we know that that is actually going to improve as projects like this scale up. We also got from site plan to completion in 7 months. And for those people that know anything about building, that's an incredible feat to get from site plan to completion in 7 months. And that, a lot of people will chalk it up to, oh, 3D printing is so fast. I would say it is the collaboration that we built with our local municipality and the partners on the project. That's how we got it done. We're now researching and studying at the same time as we built the house. We've actually poured 3D printed sample walls at the exact same time, and those samples are now being tested at the University of Windsor. And I can tell you, you can park 90 cars on these houses. If tornado hits Leamington or a hurricane, as what's happening in the world right now, these houses will be probably the only houses left standing. We've had the houses in use for 2 years, and as a builder, we have a carry-on warranty, and every year as people finish their first year, there's all kinds of deficiencies, nail pops, things like that we have to fix in the first year. There are no reported deficiencies on these houses. So the laboratory research is ongoing. There are some printed studies by Dr. Marcus Silveira on the sample components, but it's all very exciting. And we know that the way to scale up is that if we scale up, the printer costs can be spread out over more homes. So if you think about a printer at home when you're printing photocopies, instead of handwriting additional copies of something like they used to do, you now photocopy or you now print multiple copies. It's the exact same concept, but with houses. If you're using the same design over and over and over and over again, that's how you save money on these houses. Our houses were also over-engineered because we were trying to meet the building code that currently exists.
Thank you, Ms. Coughlin. You can conclude your comments in answers to a question.
Sure.
But now we will go to Mr. Aitchison to begin with 6 minutes.
Ms. Coughlin, I'll start by giving you, a minute to finish your thought, if you don't mind.
Oh, I was just saying that we had to adapt to achieve the current building code, so we had to over-engineer the houses. For example, on the houses, because of the way the code is written, you have to have fire separation on party walls between units. Common sense would tell you concrete is a fire separation, but since there's no part of the code that talks about 3D printed concrete walls, we had to actually put money out to put fire separation drywall on top of the concrete walls, just on the party walls. But there's just little things that as the code improves and these technologies are accepted into the code, we'll be able to save money on and time.
So it's safe to say then that the code needs to maybe catch up to some of the innovations that you're coming up with.
Absolutely, yes.
Can I ask you then, in terms of this what sounds like an amazing collaboration with the University of Windsor and the city, was part of the collaboration with the city? Did they assist with like a piece of land, for example, for free, or did they waive any of the fees like development charges and those kinds of things? Did they help in that way?
The land was actually provided by the Bridge Youth Resource Center, which was another one of the partners. They already owned the land. Where the collaboration really came in, and I think I was listening in to Kevin Lee earlier, talking about municipal differences in how the Building Code and Planning Act are applied and how they work. And we worked with the town of Leamington because they have a really innovative mindset. We got on a meeting with them right out of the gate and talked about how important this project was, and we had all hands on deck to make sure that this made it through. So we even had, building officials were out on the site regularly. But the thing is, I think my point would be that, if every project, if every house was approached with the same excitement that was approached for this 3D printed home, we would be able to meet our housing targets, because things were streamlined from every level. Even, working with the innovation team at CMHC versus working with other areas of CMHC, everybody was so excited about this innovative project, and they were working so hard to make it succeed. And I find when I'm building my traditional homes, you don't have that enthusiasm, and the process is very bogged down. So I strongly attribute the success of this. Yes, 3D printing is great, but the collaboration that we had with the town that got this done is why it was done so fast.
That's actually an incredible story, and I think that the key word in all of that for me was streamlining. They streamlined the process and they got it done. Everybody worked together, and they made it happen, which is amazing. Now I'd like to switch to Mr. Chouinard for a moment. Mass timber is a brilliant medium, and I totally agree we should be using a lot more of it. And I appreciate your comments about using the Rapid Housing Initiative through the CMHC. May I ask, though, in terms of your dealings with the CMHC, we've heard mixed reviews about the CMHC and their ability to respond and the cost related to getting projects approved for funding. How has your experience been with the CMHC on your various projects?
Well, I think firstly, without the CMHC, a lot of these projects would not have gone forward. However, it's true. We have had the same challenges in that it takes a long time for projects to be funded, and that certainly doesn't facilitate the speed with which we're able to deliver our projects.
Okay, thanks for that. I'd like to ask you another question, though, and I'm generally not sure about this, but mass timber, I mean, it's the lumber industry. Is there any impact on the mass timber construction and industry? Is there any impact on the industry related to softwood lumber tariffs that the Americans have in place? Does that impact the broader industry and make mass timber more expensive?
Not in that respect. We are not selling softwood lumber in the U.S. market. We're selling a finished product, which goes under a different category. So right now, we are not impacted by that specifically. However, the U.S. is starting to enact policies that are promoting American manufacturers and, to a lesser degree, Canadian manufacturers or foreign manufacturers. So we're affected by those laws and those policies, not so much the softwood lumber industry.
So we obviously at the national level here, this is one of those areas where we do have obviously some work to do to make sure we keep that market open to Canadian manufacturers.
Yes.
Okay. Well, listen, we only have 30 seconds left, and I could take up all that time with a question, so we'll pass it on. Thank you both for your time.
Mr. Aitchison, Mr. Coteau. Have I got it right this time?
Yep.
For 5 minutes, for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses today. This study is, I think, a very exciting study because it really allows us as a committee to explore new innovation that's taking place here in our country and look outside of our country to see what's working. And I like how you phrased it, Mr. Chouinard. You said that it's either we slow down demand or we increase supply. And I think innovation and technology will really allow us to increase supply in this country and to tap into our natural resources, to make it eco-friendly, to increase speed, lower cost. All of these pieces, I believe, are really great benefits of what your sector is doing. The mass timber sector is eco-friendly. It allows us as a country to really tap into those resources. At the end of the day, are you building, if we put the municipal regulations aside, and I'm talking about the actual building of a structure, is the mass timber actually increasing our speed time? Is it eco-friendly, and is it sustainable, and also does it actually end up being cheaper?
Good questions. Let's deal with the cost issue and the price of affordable housing. When the commonly held belief is that mass timber is more expensive than other forms of construction, and I took on affordable housing partly because I wanted to dispel the belief that mass timber is in fact more expensive. And we now source all of our materials from Ontario. We manufacture in a highly automated facility in Ontario. We sell and distribute many of our products locally, and we have proven that mass timber is actually one of the most cost-effective ways of building affordable housing. It's slightly more expensive than an all stick frame construction, but it's 15 to 20% faster than an all lightwood frame form of construction. So, and the beauty of the hybrid structures that we're promoting in the industry is all of the components are factory made. All of the lightwood frame materials, all of the mass timber components are made in factories. And so we can produce these buildings in volume. Absolutely, it's environmentally friendly. As I indicated in my presentation, we are using our forest's natural ability to absorb carbon and to store the remaining carbon in these forms of these beautiful buildings. And so there's a huge environmental push to this form of construction. So in answer to those questions, absolutely.
Yeah, we've come I think a long way. When I sat on at the Ontario government side in cabinet, we had a debate on increasing the actual story level of wood frame buildings, and to see your several projects later, just based on your company alone, and some of them reaching 8 stories is impressive. So thank you so much for the work you're doing. To Fiona Coughlin, a quick question around just being on the cutting edge of technology, being at that place where you're leading the way and embracing new technology that is really at the edge of change. Was it difficult? I know you said that there was a lot of enthusiasm for the project, but getting people on board to adopt new technology in housing, was it difficult convincing people that this was the way to go?
Not for my team. We were really, I think I think it just really depends on your team. We're an innovative group, so we wanted to try. I think at first I was a little nervous for sure, because, sometimes cutting edge is bleeding edge, but I knew that we had the right group together. And so we didn't have any pushback in locally, but I do often present, and I share this information with other Habitat affiliates, and I present at different conferences across the country. And, there's always some skepticism. I think that comes also from the fact that there's sometimes, YouTube videos and different stories that come out. Oh, you can build a house in 5 minutes for $1. And, it's just completely exaggerated. And so I need to, I think, share the truth of here's how the process was for the first one, and here's the places where we can improve it so that people can actually think about this as a practical method for building. And I do think it's very practical for the affordable housing sector, especially when we talk about the no deficiencies. Not having to replace drywall every year in an affordable housing structure is an amazing benefit to something like this.
I want to thank you. I want to thank both of you for, being at that innovative cutting edge of the technology shift that's taking place in this country. I think that we as Canadians have an incredible opportunity to embrace the best technology, not only here in our country, but around the world, to really forge a new path when it comes to home building, to make it more accessible, to make it more affordable, to build faster. And I think technology will play a massive role in doing that. So thank you so much for being at that cutting edge of technology and really leading the way in this country. Thank you.
So,
you're welcome.
3 seconds left. Madame Chabot for a 6 minute.
Merci, Monsieur.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson, and thank you to our witnesses. I'll take advantage of my line of questioning to move my motion. I believe that you received it on the 27th of September, and it has to do with workers in the seasonal sector and the enhancements to be made to employment insurance. Now, I think it'll take us a bit of time. This is my second kick at the can, so, third time or second time lucky in this case. And I think that this is important, this motion. Now, as Mr. Lapointe pointed out, in the building sector, there's also an issue when it comes to employment insurance, and that affects seasonal workers, and it's across the board, and therefore improvements need to be made, and therefore I would move that there be 3 meetings held on this issue so that we can hear from advocacy groups and other relevant stakeholders, of course including the Minister and officials from EDC Canada, and that the committee report all of that to the House. Thank you, Mr. Chair. 27th of September, in fact, my motion.
Madame Chabot, would you please read the motion into the record? You just explained it. You have to move the motion.
Monsieur le Président, j'ai pas de traduction, j'ai pas.
I don't have interpretation, Mr. Chair.
Are you on the right channel? No, it's no. Yes. Madame Chabot, parlez.
C'est OK?
We're all good, I think.
Oui. Oui. Madame, move your motion.
Que conformément.
Pursuant to the standing orders, the committee undertake a study on the plight of workers in seasonal sectors by bringing improvements and necessary changes to the EI system in order to address the needs of these workers who often have to come to grips with job insecurity and have financial troubles, both for themselves and their families. The committee dedicate 3 meetings, 2 of which will be dedicated to hearing from witnesses and including the Minister from ESDC and officials who will be able to respond to members' questions for 1 hour, as well as the unemployed advocacy groups and any other relevant witnesses and stakeholders, and the committee report this recommendation to the House forthwith.
Merci, Madame Chabot. The clerk has advised me the motion is in order. I just want to advise the witness, Madame Chabot has used her time to move a motion, which is her prerogative. We have to deal with it before we return. Discussion on the motion moved by Madame Chabot. Seeing none, then a recorded vote on the adoption of the motion. Clerk?
Mr. Fergus-Cados?
Oui.
Mr. Long?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Coteau?
Yes.
Mr. Van Bynen?
Oui.
Mrs. Gray?
Yes.
Mrs. Falk?
Yes.
Mrs. Vienne?
Oui.
Mr. Aitchison?
Oui.
Madame Chabot?
Oui.
Ms. Zarillo?
Yes.
Yeas pour 11-11, nays contre 0, aucun.
Motion carried. Madame Chabot, 2 minutes. Madame Chabot? Madame?
Ms. Chabot, you have 2 minutes.
Oui,
Well, 2 minutes, a quick question in that case. Now, I understand that there are a lot of challenges. For example, the labour shortage, the housing crisis. Can you somehow have speed and quality at the same time? That's my question. I'm of the belief that speed should never be pitted against quality when it comes to building. Do you have all the tools that you need, i.e. by way of federal programs and so forth, to be able to deliver both on terms of speed and quality?
et de la sécurité.
And of course safety when it comes to the housing units built.
Chacun.
Each witness can take a stab at that.
I guess I can take a stab at it. Obviously, we can always use a little more support and funding from all levels of government to achieve the need for speed and the quality. I think that what was brought up by Kevin Lee earlier about harmonization, there's ways to achieve speed without impacting quality. So harmonization between the Building and Planning Act across municipalities would make things easier, because I currently represent an area that has several municipalities, and I can't build the same house from one neighborhood to the next. And so there are areas where we're wasting time that don't impact the worker and don't impact the community. So there's ways we can do that.
Merci, madame.
I also would say
Thank you very much.
Monsieur Chouinard, her time is over. You can address it in a follow-up. Ms. Cirillo for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and my questions will be for Mr. Chouinard for this first section. So, in March 2019, I was fortunate enough to be in Penticton when the NDP Premier, John Horgan, announced allowing for 12-story mass timber homes. And then in June 2019, when I was on City Council in Coquitlam, I was fortunate enough to be chairing the meeting where Coquitlam directed staff to take the steps for Coquitlam to be an early adopter of the National Building Code in regards to mass timber buildings. And in 2021, we changed our zoning bylaw to allow for the 12-story mass timber buildings. And I'm happy to say today that in Coquitlam, Adara has the first construction of a 12-story apartment building. So it's been a journey, but certainly it's been, for BCers, a very important one. So, Mr. Chouinard, my question is around how is mass timber 12-story, and I understand there's conversations about it going to 18, so maybe you can fill us in on that, but how is it currently incorporated in the National Building Code, and what are the disparities by provinces and territories? And then and the other question I'd like to ask is, how can mass timber help Canada meet its climate goals?
Firstly, Matt, the code has come a long way over the last number of years. Originally, here in Ontario, for example, we were only able to go to 4 stories. Then it quickly jumped to 6 stories. Currently, we can build a mass timber building in Ontario to 12 stories. And as of January 1, we will be able to go to 18 stories. So where code was traditionally falling behind the market, in fact, at least here in Ontario and Coquitlam, as I understand it, is actually ahead of the industry. The code allows us to go to 18 stories, but the industry is a little slow to be able to design, engineer, and supply buildings up to 18 stories. So, and it varies across the provinces. It also varies across different states within the United States. But eventually, it's all catching up, and it's a very positive development for the mass timber industry and for environmental performance. On the issue of climate change, the concrete and the steel industries are responsible for somewhere between 12 to 14% of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere today. And we need to find other ways of building that don't exacerbate the carbon dioxide problem. And mass timber is part of that solution. What we're doing, as indicated earlier, is we're leveraging our forest's natural ability to absorb carbon dioxide and to restore the remaining carbon ultimately in the form of these beautiful buildings. So it's unlike the concrete and steel industries that are spewing all of this carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. The mass timber industry is not only removing it from the industry, from the environment, but storing it in the form of these beautiful buildings. So absolutely, there's a huge environmental push to this form of construction.
Mr. Chouinard, in the staff report, I pulled up the staff report from February 2021 in Coquitlam, and it says tall mass timber buildings create substantially lower greenhouse gas emissions than concrete structures of smaller sizes, which you just spoke about. And as CLT components are manufactured off-site, there are significant reductions in construction site waste. Neighborhood impacts are also reduced with shorter construction times, smaller crews, and less construction noise. Would you agree with that statement, Mr. Chouinard?
Absolutely. On the waste issue, all of the components that we manufacture are manufactured to and designed to reduce the amount of waste. So when we ship one of our buildings to site, there is almost no waste whatsoever. All of the component parts have a unique location where they fit within the building, much like IKEA furniture. So there's no cutting of those materials on site, which dramatically reduces the amount of waste. A typical, say, 6-story building will require 20 workers if used conventional construction materials. Typically, a building like ours, a 6-story building, say 25,000 square feet, would only have about 6 workers on site. So it reduces the amount of labor on site and increases the speed. And also, it's much less disruptive. You don't have dozens and dozens of concrete trucks coming in and out of the site. There are a lot fewer trucks to be able to deliver a mass timber building to site than conventionally constructed buildings.
Okay, thank you so much. And my last question here is for Ms. Coughlin. Just around, you introduced the accessibility factor, and this committee is disability inclusion. So I wonder if you wouldn't mind sharing what kind of accessibility innovations and challenges your organization and your clients have experienced in housing.
Well, we definitely know that all houses are not built the same, and so we are looking to try to achieve accessibility on as many builds as possible. I think the innovation that we found on this great project was partnering with the Invest Windsor Essex. They have a virtual reality cave that they use for the automotive industry to test cars, and so I think that collaboration was really amazing because they used that technology that they use for Ford Motor Company and adapted it for housing. And I thought that was brilliant. They actually took the BIM model of our home, made a virtual reality rendering, and we were able to steer the wheelchair through and then see where we needed to adapt our plans before the shovel hit the ground. And so there's opportunity for collaboration there.
Thank you, Ms. Coughlin. Thank you, Ms. Cirillo. Ms. Gray for 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. My first questions are for Habitat for Humanity, and first of all, I want to thank you for the good work that you do. I know in my community of Kelowna Lake Country, I've volunteered for our local organization, and they also have a restore, and so I just want to thank you and all of the volunteers and all the people involved in your organization. I wanted to ask about a commissioned report that was done by Habitat for Humanity Canada last year studying the housing crisis. And in that report, it found that 49% of Canadians were spending 50% or more of their household income on housing costs. Do you think that number has gotten worse or better over the last 9 years, based on your experience?
Oh, it's absolutely gotten worse. And we're seeing that even in the applications that we're receiving. When I started working here, the applications we received were from people who had had some kind of significant setback in their life and needed a hand up and out of that challenge. And now we are getting applications from, just your everyday working class. Like, it's at the point now where most of us sitting around the table, and probably you in the room, are thinking of your children, your grandchildren, your nieces and nephews, and wondering how can they ever own a house. And we believe that ownership is a way, like when we were talking about rent control earlier on, ownership is a way to democratize rent control, because if someone owns their house, they can actually build equity, and they have control over how much they put into their housing. So yes, we've seen that the applications have changed to now we're looking at just your general working class public can't get a house.
Wow. Thank you for that. That same report also found 58% of Canadians were worried about sacrificing basic needs like food or clothing in order to afford rent or mortgage payments. And so based on your experience, do you think that, again, more or less people are still sacrificing basic needs to afford rent or mortgages?
Yeah, that holds true. That's absolutely correct.
Great. Thank you for that. I wanted to ask you, we have had, there's been a number of testimony through different committees relating to innovation and the innovation economy. And there's been some talk here today about some of the innovative techniques that are being used in home building. And so I wanted to ask you that, when we're looking at investment in innovative technologies for home building, that with the Liberal capital gains tax increases, do you think that this could hurt technology adoption with companies previously looking to invest in innovative home technologies for home building?
I think that's a little outside my scope of expertise. I build houses, so but I think that's a good question, but I don't have an answer for that one.
Okay, thank you. I'll move on to something else. We had heard previous testimony at this committee on how the federal government's housing agency requires not-for-profits to build far above standard building codes, and this can add thousands, if not tens of thousands, to any project. Have you experienced this yourself?
Yes, yeah. I think, well, what I was saying in my previous comment is I worked with the innovation department on this project, and I think the innovation department of CMHC really did everything in their power to make this project succeed. And I think sometimes other funders have many kinds of strings attached for various motives and reasons that maybe don't prioritize the goal of housing. So it depends from funder to funder, but in our world as a nonprofit, we're always seeking funding from different groups. And it's kind of a little spider web to try and figure out how to meet all the benchmarks. So it does disadvantage nonprofit home builders over the for-profit community.
So specifically with the federal government's housing agency, do you have any sense on how much these extra costs might add per, say, square foot or per unit or per project?
Yeah, on our particular homes that we build in Windsor, there is an increased cost. I think about $15,000 on our house. We did a little bit of math on a per house. So it does add a cost.
Well, that's substantive. That's a substantive cost when you're trying to build affordable housing, isn't it? To have the Federal Housing Agency add those extra costs on.
Yeah, it does make it more challenging because we have to exceed the building code by, I think it's 25%. So while a for-profit developer is building to a certain building code, we have to actually exceed the code. So my thought is perhaps it would make more sense to just change the building code so that we're both building to the same rule book.
Those are amazing numbers. That's
yeah.
crazy.
Move to Mr. Collins for 5 Mr. Collins for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to both of the witnesses. I'll start with Mr. Chouinard. Mr. Chouinard, you talked about both the supply issue and the rapid housing program. And of course, all three levels of government want to construct as much housing supply as possible, as quickly as possible. And by all accounts, the Rapid Housing Initiative program was incredibly popular. I know as a former councillor, it was incredibly popular with my municipality for the support that it provided to the vulnerable populations that you highlighted. And it was incredibly popular amongst nonprofit organizations who took advantage of that program as well. For all the facilities that I visited, and I've been to Faro in my riding of Stony Creek, NRB in Cambridge, I visited Beck's facility in Ancaster, and I visited with my friend and colleague, Mr. Fragiscatos, your facility last year in St. Thomas. Almost all suppliers talked about how the rapid housing program drove innovation because hundreds, if not thousands of units were being constructed in facilities like yours across the country. Can you talk about, we're looking for recommendations here today for the purposes of creating a report. Can you talk about how programs should and could be tailored to housing innovation, much like rapid housing, and the benefits that accrue to suppliers like yours in terms of building upon some of the technologies that you're currently using today?
Sure. The majority of projects that we have delivered to date, say 80% of our projects have been supportive housing projects. And these projects require government funding in order to go forward. Virtually, 80% of those projects have been funded through the government's Rapid Housing Initiative. And clearly, none of those projects would have gone ahead without funding. I know that there is talk about the Rapid Housing Initiative being expensive, and there is some consideration to changing it or abolishing it. I think it's the single most effective program in place for developing the kinds of housing that we have been doing so far. I think it would be a huge mistake to eliminate that. And if you do decide to eliminate it, then you need to replace it with other programs that are going to contribute the funding that's necessary to build the kind of housing that we've been doing previously. Certainly, when these programs are funded, and we know we have revenue streams to be able to build buildings of this type, it encourages us to continue to invest in our form of construction. We're building a brand new plant immediately adjacent to the current plant, and we do that because now the affordable housing work we do represents about 30% of all of our work. So if you abolish programs that limit our ability to do those kinds of projects, then it's going to discourage continuous investment on our part.
Thanks for that answer. I'm going to turn to procurement, Mr. Chouinard. And when I look at the Rapid Housing Initiative, the first two rounds, if memory serves me right, they required that those buildings be constructed in 12 months. Of course, it was born out of the pandemic as emergency shelters were closed and those Army barrack-style designs were abandoned, and we had to pivot to a different model. Round three, I think, took us to an 18-month timeline. And those forced municipalities who weren't looking at conversions of old motels and hotels, as an example, to turn to your industry. And so the specs that were in that program, the procurement specs, essentially led affordable housing providers to your door and others. What recommendations do you have around procurement as it relates to, we have some of those that relate to greenhouse gas emissions. You talked about the benefits that mass timber provides as it relates to the environment. But do you have recommendations around specifications for future programs that speak to materials and or other related issues?
Yeah, so when the first rounds of the Rapid Housing Initiative came out, there was a stipulation of 12 months. And our first project, the first time we had done an affordable housing project, we not only assembled a 23,000 square foot building in only 20 days, but the project from beginning to end, from original funds from the Rapid Housing Initiative to occupancy was 12 months. And comment came up earlier about the importance of collaboration, and we did that in a collaborative environment and everybody dedicated to the task. Now that we have an additional 6 months, it's a bonus. It may so it's it just makes it a lot easier for us to accomplish that objective. On the procurement side,
thank you, Mr. Chouinard. Yes, if you could, your thought on that last question, if you could provide it to the committee in writing, that would be most helpful. Madame, we have 2 minutes left. Madame Chabot, pour 2 minutes. Madame?
Merci, Monsieur.
Well, thank you. In that case, Mr. Chouinard, if you'd like to finish what you had to say, but you referred at length to the Rapid Housing Initiative, and under the National Housing Strategy of the federal government, well, this was one of the most welcomed programs and most successful when it comes to the supply of affordable housing. Now, you said that in your case, it amounted to about 30%. Now, given that you use softwood lumber as a material of choice, are there particular challenges with that material and the need to build affordable housing? Are there any particular constraints you face?
I am not receiving the translation, so unfortunately I was. Mon nom est française, mais
I have a French-sounding name, but I'm an Anglo. Well, the interpreter interprets my remarks, so
I couldn't understand the question.
Chouinard, as we're coming to the end, I will have the clerk forward you the question from Madame Chabot in anglais, and you can, if you would not mind responding to the committee clerk, that would be most appreciated. So, merci. That gives us our time. Is it the will of the, before we'll be meeting again on Thursday, is it the wish of the committee to adjourn? It is. Committee adjourned. Madame Chabot?